Ethan Cole had given 35 years of his life to Redwood Garage. At 58, he moved slower than the new hires, but no one could touch his precision. He didn't just fix cars, he restored trust, repaired memories, and built a reputation that stretched beyond Rivertown. He knew every regular by name, remembered which child first learned to drive in which vehicle, and always brewed the first pot of coffee before sunrise. To him, Redwood wasn't a business, it was family. Mr. Granger, the original owner, had believed in people first, profits second. Ethan had stayed through 3 recessions, 2 floods, and more than a few broken hearts, because the garage meant something deeper. It wasn't chrome or grease, it was community. And though his hands had grown stiff with age, his heart remained steady. But on a Monday morning in October, something shifted, something Ethan never thought would happen under that roof. That Monday, Ethan arrived early, as always, his thermos steaming and toolbox in hand. But something was off. The front windows, once lined with thank you notes and faded family photos, were bare. Inside, the smell of fresh paint replaced the familiar scent of oil and metal. The old analog clock above the service counter was gone, replaced by a flat screen flashing, "Time is money," in bold red letters. Then he saw it, a digital timer mounted above each service bay. Derek Granger, the founder's corporate-minded nephew, stood grinning near Ethan's station. "We're modernizing, Ethan," he said. "Productivity tracking starts today. No more guesswork. Every second counts now." Ethan blinked, silent. For decades, no one had timed his hands. His customers came for his care, not his speed. He stared at the ticking red numbers. In that moment, something inside him began to crack, though he didn't say a word. By noon, the garage felt foreign. Ethan watched younger mechanics glance nervously at their timers, fumbling under pressure. A loyal customer, Mrs. Dawson, arrived with her aging Toyota, the same one Ethan had serviced for 18 years. She smiled warmly, but before Ethan could greet her, Derek stepped in. "New policy," he said curtly. "All incoming jobs go through dispatch now." The warmth drained from Mrs. Dawson's face. "But I always talk to Ethan," she began. Derek cut her off with a clipboard and forced smile. Ethan stood frozen, the red numbers still ticking overhead. That evening, as he packed up, he noticed a shiny new wall plaque beside the front desk, "Efficiency over emotion." The place he once considered a sanctuary now treated him like a relic. That night, Ethan sat in his truck longer than usual, watching the garage lights flicker out, unsure whether he still belonged behind those doors. The next morning, Ethan arrived to find his nameplate removed from his workstation. In its place was a laminated schedule, Bay 3, Technician number 47. He wasn't even a name anymore, just a number. Derek strolled by with a Bluetooth earpiece, barking orders about turnaround times and labor quotas. Ethan's tools, painstakingly organized over decades, had been rearranged, labeled with inventory tags like they belonged to the shop, not him. He quietly opened his locker, where a photo of him and Mr. Granger still hung. For the first time in 35 years, the garage felt like someone else's space. At lunch, none of the new hires joined him at the picnic bench out back. They were glued to their phones, trading memes and engine specs, unaware of the stories etched into Ethan's hands. That night, he told his wife, "Something's different. And I don't think it's just the shop anymore." 2 days later, while Ethan was meticulously rebuilding the transmission of a vintage Ford, Derek approached with a clipboard and a cold expression. "You're too slow, Ethan," he said flatly. "This job should have been done 2 hours ago." Ethan didn't flinch. He pointed to a cracked gear, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. "If I'd rushed it, she'd be back on the road with a broken axle next week." Derek smirked. "We're not running a nostalgia museum. We need results." Then came the final blow, "Pack your bay. Today's your last." Ethan stared at him, stunned, not with anger, but with a quiet disbelief. No meeting. No thank you. Just numbers. Just time. The man who had saved hundreds of cars and customers was being discarded like a worn-out wrench. As he stood in silence, one of the digital timers beeped behind him, loud, impersonal, and final. Ethan didn't argue. He simply nodded, turned back to his workbench, and began packing his tools with the same care he'd shown every engine for 35 years. Each socket, each wrench held stories, of emergency repairs in snowstorms, of engines rebuilt for widows who couldn't afford new cars, of long nights spent teaching apprentices the art of listening to a motor's rhythm. The younger mechanics watched in stunned silence as he moved with quiet dignity, refusing to let bitterness touch his hands. Before leaving, he walked the perimeter of the garage, touching the faded wall where Mr. Granger's first business license once hung. Near the door, he paused by the coffee station, now replaced by a vending machine, and left behind a folded note that read, "Machines can't replace memory. Good luck." Then he stepped outside, sunlight catching the edge of his worn leather toolbox. News of Ethan's departure spread through Rivertown faster than an oil leak on a hot day. By dusk, the regulars were calling each other in disbelief. Mrs. Dawson wept on her front porch, clutching the receipt from the last repair Ethan had done. The Classic Car Club, a tight-knit group of restoration purists, pulled all their scheduled appointments from Redwood Garage. "If Ethan's gone, so are we," said one member flatly. Even rival mechanics in neighboring towns paused, because everyone in the trade knew Ethan Cole wasn't just a technician. He was the standard. Redwood's phones began ringing, not with new appointments, but with complaints and cancellations. Derek didn't see it coming. He had replaced the heart of the shop with numbers and timers, forgetting that reputation can't be scanned or scheduled. As the garage grew quieter, something bigger was waking up beyond its walls. 3 days later, Ethan's phone buzzed non-stop. Former clients, old apprentices, even garage owners from neighboring counties reached out, not just to offer support, but opportunities. Among them was a call from Summit Performance Garage, a respected shop on the outskirts of Nashville. The owner, Howard Lane, had admired Ethan's work from afar for years. "We don't just want a mechanic," Howard said. "We want a legacy. Come run our restoration division." It wasn't the highest-paying offer Ethan received, but it was the one that felt right. That night, he walked out to his shed, opened the old trunk where he kept his teaching notes and tool blueprints, and smiled for the first time in days. Redwood had been his roots, but maybe Summit could be his canopy. The next morning, he picked up the phone and said 2 words that would change everything: "I'm in." Ethan's first day at Summit Performance Garage felt like stepping into a parallel universe, modern, yes, but built on respect, not control. Howard greeted him with a firm handshake and a smile that reached his eyes. "No timers here," he joked. "Just passion and precision." The shop buzzed with energy, but it wasn't frantic, it was focused. Ethan was introduced not as a hire, but as head of technical integrity, a title he hadn't expected but immediately took to heart. His first project, restoring a 1963 Corvette Sting-Ray for the state's Automotive Heritage exhibit. As he ran his fingers along the car's weathered frame, a familiar calm returned. In the break room, young mechanics approached him not with skepticism, but curiosity, hungry to learn. That evening, as Ethan locked up, he paused to breathe in the scent of oil and promise. Redwood was behind him, but legacy had just begun again. Back in Rivertown, Redwood Garage was unraveling faster than Derek could react. The digital timers that once ticked with authority now counted failure after failure. Repairs were returned incomplete. Loyal customers, many who had stuck with the shop for decades, left negative reviews online, citing cold service and careless hands. Derek tried slashing prices, offering weekend deals, but nothing worked. The younger mechanics, though quick with their tools, lacked the instincts that only years under the hood could teach. One mishandled brake job even led to a minor highway accident, no injuries, but headlines that made their way into town papers. Derek sat in his office late one night, staring at the old photo of Mr. Granger and Ethan shaking hands at the 25th anniversary party. The slogan on the wall, "Efficiency over emotion," now felt hollow. For the first time, he wondered if he'd broken something no wrench could fix. The following week, Redwood Garage faced its most humiliating moment yet. A long-standing client brought in a vintage Thunderbird for a full engine rebuild, a task Ethan once handled with quiet mastery. Without him, the team botched the wiring, cracked a rare part, and delayed the job by over 10 days. The client pulled the vehicle mid-project and publicly declared he'd never return. The shop's voicemail was filled with cancellations. Even the new hires began questioning their future, whispering in corners and eyeing job boards. Derek felt the pressure mount, financially, emotionally, reputationally. He started staying late, pacing the empty bays, replaying every decision he'd made since taking over. One evening, he found Ethan's old note tucked behind a dusty coffee canister: "Machines can't replace memory." For the first time, Derek didn't roll his eyes. Instead, he sat down, silent, the garage around him feeling more like a tomb than a business. 3 days later, a sleek silver Porsche Panamera rolled through the gates of Summit Performance Garage. Ethan was under the lift, tightening bolts on the Corvette's undercarriage when he heard the engine purr to a stop. He wiped his hands and stepped out, only to lock eyes with Derek, his suit more wrinkled than usual, eyes sunken, pride clearly left in the car. "I was wrong," Derek said, voice low but steady. "The shop's falling apart. Customers don't just want speed, they want soul. And I didn't see that until it was gone." Ethan said nothing, just folded his arms. "Uncle Granger's coming out of retirement," Derek continued. "He's restructuring ownership. We want you back, not as an employee, but as a full partner." He opened a leather folder, revealing legal documents and a title page: "Redwood Garage, Granger and Cole Partnership Agreement." For a moment, Ethan just stared, unsure if this was redemption, or too late. Ethan held the folder in his hands, the weight of it heavier than the paper inside. The offer was generous, more than he ever imagined, but the wound was still fresh. He looked Derek in the eye and asked quietly, "Why now?" Derek hesitated. "Because I finally understand what we lost. And what I never appreciated." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His mind drifted to the quiet evenings at Redwood, the smell of grease and coffee mingling in the air, the way Mr. Granger used to pat his shoulder and say, "You don't teach heart, you recognize it." But he also remembered the humiliation, the way his name had been replaced with a number, the silence that followed his exit. Ethan looked at the shop bustling behind him, young mechanics laughing, learning. "This place believes in people," he said. But something in his chest stirred, unresolved. Redwood wasn't done with him yet. That night, Ethan sat alone in his garage at home, surrounded by decades of memories, photos of smiling customers, old invoices scribbled with thank you notes, trophies from local car shows. He picked up a faded Polaroid of himself and Mr. Granger, taken the day they'd rebuilt a '57 Chevy from scrap. Beneath it, in Mr. Granger's handwriting, "The soul of this place lives in your hands." Ethan closed his eyes. Redwood had lost its way, but maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to stay lost. The next morning, he returned to Summit and sat down with Howard Lane. "I never expected you to stay forever," Howard said kindly. "What you've done here will last, because you taught others how to care." Ethan nodded, heart heavy yet clear. "I need to finish something I started." And just like that, with gratitude in one hand and purpose in the other, he prepared to return. When Ethan stepped back into Redwood Garage, the silence was deafening. The walls, once covered in memories, still felt sterile, but the moment he walked in, heads turned. Some of the younger mechanics straightened up, whispers passed, "That's him." Derek met him at the door, eyes lowered. Mr. Granger stood nearby, cane in hand, offering a slow, genuine smile. "Welcome home, Ethan," he said. The new sign above the office read Granger and Cole Auto Heritage, carved in polished wood. Ethan took a deep breath, stepped into Bay 1, and opened his old toolbox, untouched, just as he had left it. Within minutes, customers began to return. Mrs. Dawson brought cookies. A teenage boy came for advice. It wasn't just about fixing cars, it was about rebuilding trust. That evening, as Ethan wiped grease from his hands, he knew, he hadn't just come back to work, he'd come back to restore something sacred. In the weeks that followed, Redwood Garage began to breathe again. The timers were gone. In their place, Ethan hung a handmade sign above each bay, "Do it right, or don't do it at all." He reinstated the coffee corner with mismatched mugs and a bulletin board filled with customer photos, hand-drawn thank you cards, and even a faded newspaper clipping about the time he fixed the mayor's brakes for free. He also introduced something new, Mentorship Mondays, where young techs shadowed him not just for technical skills, but to learn empathy, the real engine of the trade. Customers returned in waves, not because of flashy ads, but because they felt seen again. Ethan didn't just fix their vehicles, he remembered their names, their stories, their lives. Emotional storytelling wasn't something he read in books. It was something he lived every single day, one repair at a time. Derek, once obsessed with metrics and margins, now stood quietly at the back of the shop during Mentorship Mondays, a notepad in hand, listening more than speaking. Gone was the tailored suit, he wore grease-stained overalls and worked beside the crew. At first, the change felt awkward, almost performative. But over time, the staff noticed, Derek was asking questions, not giving orders. One afternoon, he stayed late helping Ethan restore a classic Impala. When Ethan looked up, Derek was carefully sanding the chrome trim, sweat on his brow, concentration in his eyes. "Never realized how much heart goes into this," Derek muttered. Ethan didn't reply, he just handed over a clean rag. Redwood was no longer a place that ran on pressure, it ran on people. And for the first time, Derek began to understand that emotional storytelling didn't belong in marketing slogans. It lived in fingerprints, shared silence, and second chances. As Redwood transformed, so did its reputation. Local newspapers began featuring stories not just about restored vehicles, but about restored lives. A segment titled "The Garage with a Soul" aired on regional TV, spotlighting how a small-town mechanic was teaching emotional storytelling through bolts, brakes, and patience. Parents began bringing their teens not just for oil changes, but to learn from Ethan, lessons in respect, responsibility, and doing things the right way. Ethan often said, "The tools are simple. It's the intention behind them that matters." Word spread far beyond Rivertown. Restoration clubs, trade schools, even veterans organizations reached out, asking if they could visit, observe, or be mentored. What began as a quiet return had become a ripple through the community, and beyond. One evening, as Ethan closed up, he found a letter tucked under the shop door. It simply read, "You didn't just fix cars. You fixed people." One crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the National Association of Master Mechanics. Ethan unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the lines twice just to believe them. He'd been invited to deliver a keynote at their annual conference in Chicago, a gathering of the most respected minds in the automotive world. But this year's theme wasn't technology or efficiency. It was craftsmanship and character, the soul behind the wrench. Ethan stared at the invitation, heart pounding. Public speaking wasn't his thing. He'd always let his hands do the talking. But this was different. The world, it seemed, was hungry for more than speed, for stories, values, and meaning. Derek urged him to go. "They need to hear what you've built here," he said. Ethan looked around the garage, at the people, the warmth, the legacy, and felt something rise in his chest. Maybe it was time to share. The conference hall in Chicago was grand, gleaming lights, rows of suited professionals, and polished presentations on screens. Ethan stood backstage, heart pounding harder than any engine he'd ever rebuilt. His hands, usually steady with tools, trembled slightly as he held his notes. But when he stepped up to the podium, something shifted. He looked out, not at executives, but at human beings. "I'm not here to impress you," he began, voice clear. "I'm here to remind you why we started turning wrenches in the first place." He spoke not of profit margins, but of people, of Mrs. Dawson's cookies, of a cracked Mustang windshield wiped down with care, of a boy learning to drive in a car his father once loved. He shared the story of being replaced by a timer, and choosing to come back anyway. By the time he finished, the room was silent, not with judgment, but reverence. After the final applause, long, genuine, and standing, Ethan stepped off the stage and was immediately surrounded. Young mechanics asked to apprentice with him. Shop owners from across the country invited him to visit, to speak, to teach. One woman, with tears in her eyes, said, "You reminded me why my father opened his shop in the first place." That night, back in his hotel room, Ethan sat by the window overlooking the city lights, humbled. He hadn't planned on changing anyone, he just told the truth. But sometimes, truth told simply can echo loudly. His phone buzzed, a message from Derek, accompanied by a photo of Redwood's bulletin board, now overflowing with thank you notes, again. Ethan smiled. Emotional storytelling wasn't about speeches, it was about sincerity, service, and showing up. And now, his story had become a spark, igniting in others what had once quietly lived in him. Months after the conference, Redwood Garage had become more than a workplace, it was a symbol. Visitors came from out of state just to see the shop where kindness had outlasted machinery. Ethan spent his mornings mentoring, his afternoons turning wrenches, and his evenings sipping coffee with old friends beneath strings of warm light hung along the rafters. The once cold space now pulsed with life, stories, and second chances. Derek had fully stepped back from management, choosing instead to learn the trade with grease on his hands and humility in his heart. A new sign hung above the front desk, carved from reclaimed wood, "Legacy is built one honest repair at a time." Ethan would pause there sometimes, hand resting on the counter, listening to the rhythm of the garage, the laughter, the learning, the quiet click of tools. He never set out to be a legend. He just never stopped caring. One rainy afternoon, a teenage boy named Lucas wandered into the garage, dripping wet and holding a resume folded in quarters. "I don't know much," he mumbled, "but I want to learn." Ethan looked him over, nervous eyes, grease-free hands, but something familiar in his voice. He handed Lucas a rag and said, "First lesson, we clean our tools before we touch a car." From that moment, Lucas became the next apprentice, shadowing Ethan the way Ethan once shadowed Mr. Granger. Each turn of a wrench became more than repair, it was a passing of wisdom. Redwood had become a living story, a space where emotional storytelling thrived in the most unexpected places, over open hoods, inside quiet conversations, and in the patience to teach the next pair of hands. Ethan didn't just restore cars anymore. He was restoring belief, in others, in work done with heart, and in the value of time well spent. Years from now, people may not remember every car Ethan Cole repaired, but they'll remember how he made them feel. How he listened without rushing. How he taught without ego. How he showed that integrity isn't just a value, it's a choice, made moment by moment, job by job. Redwood Garage still stands proudly on the corner of Cedar and 3rd, not just as a place of service, but as a monument to second chances and quiet strength. In the break room, beside the coffee pot and wall of memories, hangs one final photo, Ethan, Lucas, and Mr. Granger, hands raised in grease-stained celebration. Underneath it reads, "The work you do with heart will outlast you." If this story moved you, share it. Tell someone about the Ethan in your life. And remember, sometimes, the most powerful changes begin with a simple act of care, and a willingness to stay true to who you are.